Thank you to AccuFlow for sponsoring today's video. When it comes to your own writing, do you feel like your fight scenes skid along like a dry ledger of blows? Or do they often drift off into the fog of similes, leaving readers lost and often confused? Maybe it sits somewhere in the middle, serviceable but lifeless. Whether you're staging a rooftop showdown or a courtroom sparring match, action is your narrative's pulse. Action is engaging, harrowing, and the fuel that keeps a story moving and keeps the audience invested. But action itself is a complicated storytelling element, despite being found in every type of story. From dynamic fight scenes to high-stake arguments, action is the engine of conflict and just fuels tension. But I don't need to tell you that. You know this.
Don't know what you're saying, Dutch, but it seems like I've heard it all before.
Let's instead talk about how to write better action and why your action is working better than you think it is. Welcome back to the Wrestling with Words podcast. My name is Cameron. I'm a writer and editor and your host. Here, we talk about all things related to writing and storytelling. And the goal is to help you tell better stories while also understanding how the best stories are told. Action can be a lot of things. More often not, though, when we hear action, we usually are thinking of a fight scene or some sort of combat taking place on the page or on the screen. But there are other kinds of action we can write. And usually these fall into two big categories. Fight scenes, obviously, and the other being non-violent conflict. A scene where there is some sort of fight happening, but one that is not physical. Now, a big part that I really won't go into much is that every medium has their own strengths and weaknesses. The visual medium, of course, has a lot of tools at its disposal, one being the rule of cool. And with this, action scenes are really enhanced by all of the sensory input. Things can be implied in a much different way, and we can really be engaged and sold on the action or the fight scene that is on the screen because of the spectacle. But prose also have their own strengths. The thoughts and emotions that are coming from the character can be also very immersive and really put us in the mindset of who is on the page. Also, before we go any further, a quick spoiler warning for the following things. If you are listening, you can take a look now and pause the screen. This episode really will serve as the grounding point that can help us write better fight scenes and nonviolent conflict. Both kinds of action scenes operate on similar principles, and improving them often comes down to fixing two common problems. That the action feels too scripted or the action is feeling too poetic, that it becomes abstract. The goal is to strike a balance. To do this, we'll focus on four big picture elements that every action scene should consider, those being purpose, pacing, character, and realism. Action should serve the story, themes, and characters. It's not just a spectacle. If a fight doesn't push something forward, it's most often than not just filler. Take the film Children of Men. The violence is often chaotic and raw, but is always rooted in character motivation and desperation. You're not just watching cool choreography, although there are some amazing scenes. You're watching the survival of these characters. In Red Rising, combat reflects Darrow's rebellion against an oppressive caste system. In Salen Ascends, every conflict, violent or not, forces Salen to confront his own cowardice, pushing his internal growth. Every action built around magic or powers can reflect purpose. In Mistborn, the Final Empire, Vin's mastery of allomancy mirrors her own personal growth. She levels up, but not without failure and consequences. Every fight challenges what she's learned and who she is becoming, and who she was before. And this ties directly into character motivation. If a character has something personal at stake, whether that's ideology, revenge, a guilty conscience, the scene gains weight. Conflict becomes unpredictable when characters want different things or want the same thing but for different reasons. A quick way to check if you're considering these things. If we look at a scene, if nothing about the character or the world changes after that conflict, then does it really matter? And just as action plays a role in the function of your story, a schedule plays a key role in the function of your life. I've always struggled with finding a system of organizing both my personal life, my professional life, and all of my other tangential projects. I've used physical calendars, notes apps, and a clustered combination of the two. That's why when AccuFlow came to me, I was thrilled to try their product. AccuFlow is able to seamlessly integrate all the different applications I had been using to schedule my days, combining my Gmail, Slack, Notion, and Apple Calendar all into one space. AccuFlow also has a time blocking feature that helps with quickly organizing your schedule by dragging and dropping things directly into the platform. A few features that I really love and get the most value out of are the universal inbox feature and the stats feature. The universal inbox is a centralized hub that houses all of my communications in one place, consolidating all the different ways that I speak with other people. With the stats feature, I can gain detailed insight into my productivity. It tracks how much time I spend on a project or task, making some of my client work and gig work really easy to track and quantify. Additionally, AccuFlow hosts one-on-one onboarding calls for all new users. If you want to enhance your productivity while supporting my channel, you can follow the link below or use the link on the screen to start using AccuFlow today. Thank you again to AccuFlow for sponsoring today's video. Pacing really governs tension. Not through sentence length, but through how you control the information being presented to the audience and the stakes of the scene. A slow action scene can become more intense than a fast one, depending on what's at risk and how that moment unfolds. Zoom in on when emotions peak and zoom out through larger beats. I like to think of this as a accordion, stretching and compressing time intentionally to play the rhythm of your action. Avoid blow-by-blow prose, unless there's a specific reason to show them. A great fight scene has a beginning, a middle, and an end, but it should also leave a mark. Emotional fallout, change in momentum, or a true narrative shift. Where exactly the action lives in your story matters a lot too. Is this scene a test scene, a turning point, some sort of punishment? That will really change how you pace it over the course of your story and in the moment. A climax might determine clarity and weight. A low point might feel fragmented or disorienting on purpose. Action scenes aren't just physical, they're deeply internal. What does the character believe at the start of a fight, and what do they believe at the end is a good sort of principle to ground this point. In The Last of Us Part 2, the combat is really designed to be unsettling. Winning doesn't really feel good. It often feels worse in some ways, especially as you become more familiar with Abby's friends while you are hunting them as Ellie. That's a specific design choice meant to reflect Ellie's emotional decline. Good action reveals character flaws, changes, weaknesses, and strengths. It can be reflected in a character through things like their hesitation, their ability to improvise, the cruelty or the restraint. Someone who's never killed before might freeze up. Someone driven by revenge might go too far. And a character who would never have acted with malice might be pushed beyond the pale. Let those choices show who they are or who they're becoming. You can also track progress through how many opponents or obstacles are left and how close that character is to a goal. We can also do things like highlight what a character is learning and how they are changing. But these really shouldn't be formulaic and should be somewhat used sparingly. Used alone, they can make your story feel like a checklist, but in combination with other elements and tied to character growth, they make the action feel like an important part of a larger arc. And in making it feel like it is part of a bigger piece, that bigger piece should reflect the character arc. By making the action intrinsic to the character's central conflict, that is probably a good sign that your action scenes are better than you think they are. Incorporating your action sequences and fight scenes to reflect character-centric conflict will seamlessly be integrated into the larger picture. One common thing is the confusion between realism and groundedness. Star Wars isn't entirely realistic. Well, some elements aren't realistic, but its consequences.
You were my brother, Anakin!
The betrayal, injury, loss, those all feel emotionally real. Grounding your action by showing physical or emotional costs to each interaction is deeply important. A fight should leave something behind: blood, a limp, some kind of regret, broken pride. Even fantastical action needs some sort of internal consistency to it. If your world bends the rules, it should do so for a reason, and that reason should serve the story. Take Attack on Titan, for instance. Attack on Titan avoids simple power creep by escalating moral complexity instead of just throwing stronger enemies at the cast. That keeps its action tense and unpredictable. A good rule of thumb that if a character fights, something really should change. If nothing changes, why was there a fight at all? And along that same line of thought, this really is speaking to the stakes and the consequences. Having a action scene there just for the spectacle of it or because we feel like the narrative is slowing won't service the story. We need to make it so that something is at stake, something is at risk, that something could potentially be lost or gained. In making your action sequences and fight scenes have a level of realism in the consequences that are faced by the characters, it is a good path to go on in making your fight scenes and action meaningful, impactful, and written well. The best action scenes aren't about choreography. They're about change. The tension of not knowing who will win. The risk of emotional or physical loss. The internal shift that happens when someone crosses the line. When Ellie fought Abby at the very end of The Last of Us Part 2, it wasn't just a spectacle. It was raw, and it wasn't really fun. It was a confrontation that meant something different. It was a confrontation with a terrible truth about love and revenge and the cycles of violence that ultimately left an everlasting scar. All of this, though, purpose, pacing, characters, consequence, is the real scaffolding that supports meaningful action. And whether you're writing tense duels, emotional shouting matches, or twisting, chasing car scenes, they all benefit from the same underlying question. What is really at stake here?